Black Hops Brewing, for those who don't know us, or maybe you haven't tried our beer yet. So Black Hops Brewing, we started it in the garage, which is actually how a lot of breweries get their start these days. So it's about typically passionate home brewers that want to take that to the next level. So we started in a converted yoga studio up at Mount Tambourine that my girlfriend was very upset to lose. But to give you the real story, we have to go back. We have to go way back into my childhood. So back when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I used to sit on the lounge, and my dad used to drink beer out of this ceramic cup. And whenever he would turn his back, I'd quickly grab it and have a sip. And much to my mum's dismay, I developed this taste for beer pretty early. And it's kind of cool because beer is actually one of my first memories. So to be a professional brewer now, it kind of makes a lot of sense for me. And so then if we fast forward a little bit into my teenage years, is when I started to really develop a taste for good beer. So when we were at parties, if my friends would be drinking, Tooheys New, I'd be drinking Tooheys Old, which worked really well on a couple of levels because no one would touch it. So you could leave a six-pack in the fridge and it'd be there next week. And then we kind of get into my early 20s. So this is when I really started to develop passion for craft beer. I'd spend my weekends on brewery tours and going to boutique bars to try new beers. And it was actually at a brewery tour at Burley Brewing, I think not long after they opened. And I remember sitting there and looking at the guys that were working and the brewers, and I just had this epiphany moment that this is actually a job that you could do. So the people are actually brewers, and it's in my backyard. So I kind of made my mind up that day that I was going to become a brewer. So I went home, did my resume up, sent it through to every brewery I could think of, and didn't hear back because apparently a lot of people were trying to get into brewery. So brewing is a pretty popular profession. So it took me probably 6 months of persevering, and I got my first break at a small brewery in Varsity Lakes, just literally sweeping the floors. And within 12 months, I was managing the store and looking to proceed my career. So I left that brewery and I worked at another brewery just down in Tweed Heads for about 12 months. And then I finally got a break at Burley Brewing, which was the big league for me. And I was absolutely stoked. And I worked at Burley for just over 3 years, I think it was, and really learnt a lot about the craft from Brendan and the guys there. So that was a really good experience for me. I later went on to work at Fortitude up at Mount Tambourine, and that's when Black Hops was born. So Eddie, Dan, myself, we've been friends for many, many years, and it was always going to be a natural progression for us to start a brewery. It was like all good ideas, literally sitting at the pub having a beer and saying to ourselves, we should start a brewery. And it was actually born from our first beer, which was the Eggnog Stout. So you might have heard of it. It was an idea that Eddie had to brew this beer, and it was just too good an idea to pass up. So when we first heard it, we knew that we had to run with it. And before we knew it, we kind of turned this idea to homebrew this crazy beer into plans to start a business. And it happened really quickly, and a lot of that has to do with Eddie, Dan and myself. We kind of have pretty unique skills, and it turns out that they're quite valuable to a business, and particularly to a brewery. So before we knew it, we'd already kind of made commitments to start Black Hops Brewing. And so that kind of brings us forward to today. Let's get this the right way now. So you've got Dan, myself and Eddie. So I just quickly mentioned about having those three unique skills. So starting any small business, it's about having a good team, and we've got a pretty great team. We work really well together. We have a great dynamic, and we having that power of three is really powerful for a business because it makes making decisions really easy. So it's basically 2 versus 1, and it's efficient and it's good because it keeps us motivated, keeps us moving forward, and we don't stagnate on things too much. So how it all started. So I mentioned to you that we did this eggnog stout in the garage, and before we'd even finished brewing the beer, this is where Dan's content marketing prowess comes into it. He'd already started a blog, he'd downloaded a logo, we had a website, and we were kind of halfway to looking like an actual brewery, literally still in the garage. So it was with that momentum that we kind of just kept the ball rolling. So we quickly looked at doing a commercial batch of the beer. So the first one was in the garage, so we couldn't sell it, it was just for us to try, and we gave it out to some friends in the industry, and everyone thought it was really neat, and said that we should, they kind of assumed that we were starting a brewery, so we just went with it, and we thought about doing our first commercial release. So we found a brewery in Tamborine Village that allowed us to brew the beer there under their license, and we could sell it into bars around southeast Queensland. So we sold out that batch beer before it was kegged, and that was just another big green light that we were in the right direction, and Black Hops was going to be a real thing. Now Eddie and myself, we were both working full time. I was working at another brewery, he was working in Brisbane. Dan's got his other commitments, so early on we were pretty content for Black Hops to be just a bit of a side project for us and a bit of a passion that we shared, but we found it really difficult to get tank space, so to find breweries that we could brew our beer at, and that was kind of motivation for us to just make the decision early last year to open our own physical brewery here on the Gold Coast. And as soon as we did that, it was just like one of those light bulb moments that we're definitely on the right track. Now, I could sit here and talk about beer all day long, but I think there's some key aspects of our business that you guys might be interested in. So, a lot of our momentum early on was on the back of our content marketing and our social media. So we were really heavily involved in doing that. And we as I mentioned, we had a blog. We did a podcast, a 10-part series podcast on how to start a brewery. We were heavily involved in Facebook and Instagram and any new platform that came up, and we just made sure that we had this strong presence. And it was that presence that got us noticed by bars, other brewers, and we started to develop a bit of a reputation for being the guys that are sharing how to start a brewery, and that's it's a story that's been really close to our hearts and something that we've really enjoyed doing it. A lot of that's because when we first started, we were trying to find this information, and there was no really solid sources. You had to really do your homework and to come up with the kind of strategies to start a small craft brewery. So we knew that this information would be pretty valuable. So we were happy to share that, and that's been, we've been rewarded for doing so. So we got contacted early last year from Activision, so the guys that make the Call of Duty video game, and at first we weren't quite sure if it was legit or not. It was one of those too good to be true moments, but it was through our social media that they'd heard of us. They were looking at doing an official beer for the new video game coming out, and someone in their office had heard of us, so the connection between Black Hops and Black Hops was a no-brainer for them, and we spent the next 3 months organising to brew that official beer. So that was really big for us. We made news all around the world for having the first official Call of Duty beer, which was pretty cool. Eddie was happy, he got a free PlayStation. And that kind of gets back to more about our community. So with our story and with our connection, we've tried to build a really strong craft beer community here on the Gold Coast, have good relationships with the other brewers, good relationships with the venues, and bring everyone kind of together. And it's really been good for us. I think we've helped, particularly with having Bolton out open and Burley Brewing. Like, the culture here for craft beer on the Gold Coast is really great, and we're excited to be part of it. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was our finance, because you may have heard that we did a crowdfunding campaign early in the year. So when we first set out to start Black Hops, we came up with a lot of money ourselves. We do have 2 small-time investors as part of the business, and our plan was initially to be open in December last year, which was, at the time, we knew very, very ambitious, and it was going to take a lot of things going our way to make that happen. Surely enough, with a few delays with council and licensing, we quickly knew that we were going to be opening later than we hoped, and we were we were not going to have enough money to get to our opening date. So we looked at options to raise more money. Obviously we could have gone to the bank and got a loan, or looked to sell off more shares in the business, which is something we definitely wanted to avoid. We thought the company was a really valuable asset to have, and if we could do anything to maintain that control, we would. And that's where crowdfunding came to the table. It was something that we talked about probably 6 months earlier, but at the time it didn't really suit us. We didn't necessarily need it. We thought it was just a really cool platform to raise money. And then 6 months later, we actually were going to need some extra funds. So we got back in contact with the guys at Possible, who do a crowdfunding platform. And one of the key things for us was that being able to offer our beer as a reward, and they had that as part of their package, which not all platforms did at the time. So we set about preparing for this crowdfunding campaign. And Dan did a lot of the homework, so he got in contact with the guys from Possible, spoke to a bunch of people who'd done successful campaigns, and put together a bit of a strategy that we would lead up and launch this crowdfunding campaign. So it started probably about 6 weeks before the actual campaign, and a lot of that was building awareness, because some of the key things that they mentioned to us was you want to be able to raise 30% of your goal on the first day. And you do that through building up the hype, getting those key supporters on board. So the day that your campaign starts, they're literally sitting there refreshing their computer and ready to order. So we set our goal at initially raising $10,000, and that was going to give us enough money to deliver our rewards and the money that we wanted to raise. So 30% of that was $3,000 roughly. We kind of expected if 30% is like the minimum that they suggest, then we should aim for higher than that, because if you're not getting that 30%, you're obviously potentially not doing what you should. So we set a goal of raising 50%. Now this is all very new to us. None of us had ever raised money on a crowdfunding platform, so we didn't really know what to expect when it started. But we hit that 50% in like the first hour. And we went on to raise nearly $18,000 in 24 hours. So that was pretty impressive. The things that we learned from that campaign was we probably could have been a bit more ambitious